Fighting, the simplest form of competition. Short of taking your helmet off and hitting below the belt, there are almost no rules to a fight. It's the easiest thing for a fan watching at home to understand and root for. Even the most casual of sports fans can understand the value of a great fight. But recently I've started thinking, and by recently I mean ever since Kyle Busch got his bell rung by Ricky Stenhouse, have NASCAR fights been getting more common, or is it just they're advertised more versus in the past? Is this all just a subtle form of playoff propaganda on NASCAR's part? Now to start off, let's define what a fight really is. For a fight to count in this video, there has to be some sort of actual contact or intent to harm. So, no, Chris Buescher doing a brisk walk up to Tyler Reddick on pit road at Darlington doesn't count. That still falls in the confrontation category. Part of this is for science, and the other part is if I counted every moderately angry post-race conversation, this video would be 5 hours long. 2014 is the official start of NASCAR's new playoff era where wins mattered more than they ever had before. Unless you're Ryan Newman, but we'll conveniently ignore that fact for now. And while the two major fights of the season were directly tied to the new playoff format, I was surprised to find out that these were the only two fights of the season. So congrats, Brad Keselowski, you were involved in 100% of this season's kerfuffles. That's quite the stat. 2015 is a bit of a weird one. While it's mostly known for the Kenseth-Logano feud, that surprisingly never boiled over into an actual fight. These two drivers kept their feud solely out on the racetrack and out of the garage, which I want to say is commendable, but I'm not sure if it really is. But regardless, the only two fights of the face-to-face variant this year happened in the Xfinity series between Bubba Wallace and Brian Scott, and Ty Dillon and Regan Smith. Oddly enough, the latter incident resulted in no penalties, but Brian Scott's wife was placed on probation for confronting Bubba Wallace in the parking lot after the race. Bubba was also fined for calling Brian Scott's wife a disparaging name, the details of which were never made quite clear, and probably for good reason. 2016 likewise only saw two major fights. The first being an incredible show of athleticism from John West Townley against Spencer Gallagher in the Truck Series. Both drivers were penalized $15,000, which is kinda surprising given that Spencer just kinda held on to John West Townley for a minute, but I think NASCAR just took issue with this happening on a hot racetrack and not the pit road area. The second fight also belongs to the Truck Series this year, and boy is it a memorable one, as Cole Custer tackled John Hunter Nemechek with enough conviction to be hired by the Carolina Panthers, as Nemechek essentially fenced Custer for an entire straightaway. This is an incredibly rare instance of someone actually fighting the winner of the race, as it's usually an unwritten rule that you let the celebration play out, but I think Custer had a right to this one. Surprisingly enough, no penalties came of this. The first fight of 2017 is a memorable one, as Kyle Busch marched up to Joey Logano and punched him square in the face after getting turned on the last lap at Vegas. Once again, no penalty was given. The next one is a bit more forgotten as Ross Chastain went after Jeremy Clements at Bristol in the Xfinity series, but as far as I know, no footage of the fight exists. Chastain was not penalized, but he was called to the holler after the race. Another lost fight happened in Texas later that season where Brendan Gaughan attempted to punch Ross Chastain, but this was also never posted anywhere. So we did have an uptick to 3 fights this season, but 2 of them were between Xfinity Series backmarkers, and the other happened way too early in the season to be championship related. So a relatively quiet season despite the increase. The 2018 season only saw a singular fight as Joey Gase went after Ross Chastain after the Xfinity race at Mid-Ohio. Good lord, Ross, I certainly hope this behavior doesn't carry over to the Cup Series one day. But after a slow year, 2019 was Fight Club Central, kicking off with an early season fight at Phoenix between Suarez and McDowell during... Wait, qualifying? How does a fight this intense happen for qualifying? Both drivers just made slight contact during their session, Suarez wanted to have a quick chat about it, and McDowell just started flailing punches. Fast forward a couple of months and you get Clint Bowyer beating the absolute daylights out of Ryan Newman at the All-Star race. He caught flack for doing it with his helmet on, but again, nothing from NASCAR themselves. In the summer months, you had Ben Rhodes go after Brennan Poole in the trucks, and Cole Custer and Tyler Reddick both just wanted to tell each other they really didn't like the other's hat. But the biggest fight of all happened at Martinsville late that season when the crews of Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin went at it following contact between the two earlier in the race. This one you could definitely say was playoff motivated. But it's also just the case of two guys who really don't like each other having another in a long line of disagreements. In 2020, yeah, exterior circumstances pretty much iced any physical confrontations happening this year, except for one lone fight in the Xfinity series where Harrison Burton gave Noah Gragson a light shove, and Gragson said, "That's it, I'm taking your head off now." But even during COVID, no penalties. 2021 will be another year of purely Xfinity series fights, with 3 occurring in total, but the only major publicized one was Noah Gragson taking a swing at Daniel Hemrick. Man, say what you will about Gregson, but at least he leaves that little baby pushing stuff at home. He brings the heat. 2022 continued the trend of the Xfinity Series being the premier site of most fights, with Ty Gibbs throwing a punch on Sam Mayer, take your helmet off, you little twerp, and Austin Hill absolutely laying out Mike Snyder, both taking place in Martinsville. Oh, Martinsville, I love you, and I wish that we could only race Xfinity cars there until the end of time. The first Cup Series fight since 2019 would also happen this year, as Bubba Wallace attempted to fight Kyle Larson in retaliation for Bubba Wallace right-hooking Kyle Larson. A bit of a strange one there, huh? Bubba would be suspended, but it was for the wreck rather than the fight itself, as with Ty Gibbs. But buckle up, because 2023 would be the long-awaited sequel to 2019. Not counting the 3 years that happened in between. Two of our best fighters, Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson, kicked fight season off with a bang in Kansas, with Ross delivering the punch heard around the world. Only a couple of weeks later, Eric Almirola hit Bubba Wallace with a pretty mighty mid-race shove after Bubba had apparently given him the middle finger earlier in the race. In the Xfinity Series that summer, the crews of Jeb Burton and Chandler Smith got into a light, and I mean light, scuffle. The outcome? Both crews called to the holler! Almost nobody gets called to the holler these days. I know there weren't any penalties, but still. Ryan Preece and Corey LaJoie had a scuffle that summer at Pocono. And finally, the cherry on top of this fight-filled year, Matt Crafton and Nick Sanchez at Talladega. This one had all sorts of implications. $25,000 for Matt Crafton, $5,000 for Sanchez shouting that he would kill Crafton, members of Nick Sanchez's family being suspended for fighting, and all of them called to the holler the next week. Crafton's penalty was largely due to the punch being premeditated rather than heat of the moment, as he had enough time to go to the care center, change into street clothes, and wait for the race's end. You know, you would think after such a year filled with beef that maybe cooler heads would prevail in 2024, but luckily for us, it has been anything but a dull year. Starting with the LA Coliseum, while I can't count Joey Logano and Ty Gibbs by my own rules, Stenhouse versus Nemechek during the halftime break seems just reasonable enough to include, as one driver ripping down another driver's window net is a pretty rare type of confrontation. The next fight surprisingly occurred between JJ Yeley's crew chief and Kyle Weatherman in Atlanta, which did result in a 2-race suspension for the crew chief. As you may have learned, NASCAR really doesn't like you fighting if you're not a driver. Stuart Friesen and Nick Sanchez laid hands on each other at Bristol this year, but not much else. Friesen would once again be involved in an altercation at Martinsville with Timmy Hill of all people, but this one looks more like a NASCAR 2005 chase for the Cup cutscene than an actual fight. And of course, the premier fight so far, Ricky Stenhouse with a big swing on Kyle Busch at North Wilkesboro, resulting in the biggest penalty so far that we've seen, $75,000. I know a lot of people were upset about this one, but I understand why it happened. First of all, NASCAR set the precedent with Matt Crafton that premeditated attacks were a no-go. And secondly, it's always been the rules that fines scale up with the series. So it's not surprising to see Crafton's $25,000 penalty triple to $75,000 for the Cup Series. Believe me, I like seeing Kyle Busch get punched every bit as much as the next guy who also hates Kyle Busch, but I don't think this penalty was the constitutional breach that many fans made it out to be. So that's a more detailed explanation of fights and their penalties from the last 10 years, but what about the pre-playoff era? Well, those fights aren't as well documented as the newer ones, but from what I could find, fights stayed at a pretty constant rate of about 2 to 3 per year. The only outliers are 2019, 2023, and 2024, which isn't even half over yet. So extreme recency bias would say, yes, we are having more fights now than ever. But I would also say very, very few of them are playoff related. Most of these fights happen between guys battling mid-pack, most of them with no championship hopes in the slightest. A lot of these even happen in exhibitions where there are no points towards the playoffs. So I think I can safely deduce that the playoffs actually haven't increased the amount of drama in the garage. But maybe the general lack of respect in the garage has. You've heard drivers talk about it for years now. People just run each other over nowadays. It doesn't matter if it's for a win or not. Many drivers in the lower series like Shane Van Gisbergen, Hailie Deegan, and Dale Jr. have all remarked on how incredibly aggressive the mid-pack racing's gotten in the lower series. Maybe this generational shift in values is what has ultimately led to more fights in the last few years. Or maybe it's because they know fights are marketable. Fights sell t-shirts, they get your name cheered during driver intros. And more often than not, NASCAR lets them slide nowadays. Of all the fights I mentioned in this video, maybe 10% of them had any actual penalties involved. Back in the mid to late 2000s, they penalized you just for breathing the same air as another driver. NASCAR knows that these fights do more good than harm to the sport because people tune in for them. Sometimes there is a Matt Crafton or Ricky Stenhouse case that they have to enforce, but more often than not, they're pretty hands-off. So why do you think the number of fights has skyrocketed over the last 2 years? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.